Found out my husband was living a double life with his secretary, now he's begging me to pretend it's all a misunderstanding. I'm 29, child-free by choice, and I've always known kids weren't for me. But my sister, Carlene, 27, has 2 little boys, 3.5 and 2 years old, and we live close to each other. We don't have much family left, it's basically just us since we come from a truly broken, dysfunctional background. I love my nephews, I really do. I've been around since they were born, and, as you'd guess, Carlene leans on me a lot. But lately, a lot has turned into something exhausting, on top of my own demanding career in social work and my reasons for not wanting kids myself. At this point, I'm helping out, babysitting, or watching them easily 10 to 20 hours a week, sometimes more. The amount of time she needs me has crept up slowly, and for the last 7 months or so, it's just been relentless. At first it made sense, she was job hunting, had to go to unemployment courses, occasionally wanted movie nights with friends. Stuff that I was mostly fine with, because who else does she have? But as time's gone on, I basically spend every free moment at her house. The excuses change. Lately, her best friend's mother is dying, and she has to be there for her. I do my best to understand. She's a single mom, sure, but then she started crossing lines. Sometimes, when I told her I had other plans and couldn't watch the kids, she'd send a voice message, the boys crying in the background, telling me they miss me and can't believe I'd rather do something for myself instead of them. Then Carlene would pile on, saying she didn't have anyone else to ask, telling me I was selfish for wanting a date night when she had to choose between her kids and supporting her best friend. It became less about asking, more about guilt-tripping me until I gave in. But it didn't stop there. I started noticing small, insidious things happening. I'd arrive to babysit and the house would be a disaster, no food in the fridge, or Carlene would conveniently forget to mention the kids needed a bath, or casually ask me to put together their gym bag for the next day. It was obvious these were revenge tactics for the times I said no. At first, I just assumed she'd be grateful for whatever I could do. Instead, she started texting updates on how late she'd be returning, but only after I hadn't done all the weird extra chores. It took me far too long to notice, my willingness to help was just making her demands grow. She stopped prepping meals for the kids, or even leaving money for groceries. If I picked stuff up, she'd promise to pay me back, but then guilt me out of taking her money. She started going back on her word, saying she wouldn't help me out with anything if I couldn't always help her with the boys. The excuses and backtracking would start immediately if I didn't do exactly what she wanted. One recent example really stands out. I asked to borrow a dress for a wedding, something we'd always done for each other. She agreed, but 4 days before the wedding, I couldn't drop everything to go get it for her on short notice, and suddenly she needed it herself. I ended up panic buying a new dress. Last month, she promised to pick me up after I dropped my car off for maintenance and left me stranded for hours. She took over 2.5 hours to actually answer the phone, and when she finally picked me up, she acted like it was a huge inconvenience for her. When I look back, it's mind-blowing how much of a doormat I became. Yesterday brought things to a head. Carlene called, desperate for me to watch the boys again that evening. As soon as I started to say no, she launched another round of accusations about my selfishness. Something in me just snapped. I told her to shut up and listen. If she really thought I was such a terrible, selfish person, she had 2 choices: either stop relying on me and stop exposing her kids to my supposed awfulness, or I'd start being truly selfish. No more free babysitting, no extra chores, nothing unless I got compensated. She hung up without another word. I started shaking afterwards. I hate confrontation. I don't know why it took me so long to stand up for myself. After she hung up, I panicked. Had I just lost my last real family member? My fiancé told me I should have stood up to her a long time ago, but he's biased. Now I'm stuck asking myself, did I just ruin everything? What if I never see my nephews again? What if I could have just endured a bit longer, and things would have improved? I hardly have any real friends outside of colleagues, so there's nobody else to turn to for advice. Did I make a huge mistake? And for clarity, even though I gave a couple of examples where I needed Carlene for stuff, it's not like I ask often. The things she fails at can be as basic as just not leaving meals for the boys when I'm watching them. The dress and the car are just the clearest examples of what's become a bigger pattern. Now, I'm sitting here wondering if I finally set a boundary far too late, and if I now have to live with the fallout. Update 1. During the first 24 hours after delivering that ultimatum, I decided not to answer my sister's calls or texts. I thought it best to let things cool down, but she blew up my phone, calling 77 times and sending well over 100 texts and voice messages. Most of the messages were just her lashing out, calling me a horrible person for abandoning her family. In that chaos, I took some time with my fiancé to outline clear boundaries for the future, just in case she came to her senses and agreed to my terms. I wanted to be ready, even though it seemed unlikely she'd ever come around. I set conditions. For example, I could only watch her boys up to 3 times every 2 weeks, never for more than 4 hours at a time. She'd have to provide meals. I wouldn't do bath time or bedtime, and spending my own money was entirely off the table. Then, out of nowhere, I started getting messages from what looked like an unknown number. My fiancé thought it was probably from an app. The sender ripped into me, accusing me of being a terrible sister and exaggerating, claiming now they'd have to watch their mom die alone, without Carlene to comfort them. The wording felt so off and suspicious, everything sounded just like my sister. I'm almost certain she was pretending to be a friend to manipulate my feelings. I needed advice, so on Friday afternoon, I went to my supervisor and asked if we could discuss something personal. She was great about it. Since I don't work with children and CPS has never come up in my job, I wanted to get a senior opinion. Together, we ended up making a report about Carlene. My supervisor insisted it was the right call, especially since things had escalated and Carlene showed signs she might retaliate by doing something to the boys. That possibility chilled me. I realized she's not above using anyone as leverage. Now, I think I'll give my sister the next week to cool off before I even consider resuming contact. When I check whatever messages or voicemails she leaves at that point, if they're anything like the barrage I just received, I won't respond at all. The thought makes me unbelievably upset, but deep down, I have to hope this means her boys might finally get a more stable environment. She's been using them as pawns with me all along. My fiancé has been my anchor through all of this. He wants everyone to know he's supporting me and that, honestly, I'm not that much of a doormat, except, it seems, when it comes to Carlene. On top of everything, I've started looking into counseling through work, because, honestly, paying out of pocket is way too expensive. I know I need help processing all of this, but for the first time, I feel a tiny bit hopeful things might change. Update 2. CPS called me and wanted more details, so I gave them everything I had. They were asking about specific dates and wanted to know if I had proof. I sent over a ton of screenshots of my messages with Carlene. I decided to put my name on the report this time. Somehow, it felt like my name would add weight to it, like they'd take it more seriously. But there was another part of me that felt like this was my atonement, that by finally signing my name after waiting so long, I was accepting whatever came of it. It meant my sister would absolutely know it was me who made the report, and I'd have to face whatever fallout happened because of that. I've started seeing a psychologist through my work, just one Zoom appointment so far, but it's already been helpful. I got homework, setting boundaries. It felt kind of fast, but she explained there's a reason. They're trained to move quickly because we're usually given 5 visits, so we need to make real progress. I haven't heard anything from Carlene or the kids, aside from the usual flood of abusive messages. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I've driven past their house a couple of times, just to check that everything looked normal. And it does. After someone suggested that the kids might have to be taken out of Carlene's care and asked if my fiancé and I would be willing to foster or take them in, I had a very real conversation with my fiancé. We're just not those people. We never wanted kids, never even wanted pets. The idea of building a life around caring for children day in and day out honestly sounds like a nightmare to me. Nothing about it appeals to either of us. I know that if we went down that road, we'd end up resenting it and losing touch with ourselves. At this point, I'm not sure there's much more to update. Maybe if Carlene or the kids start talking to me again, but every message so far has just been insults. Honestly, I'm afraid to reach out at all, because she's not even going to read anything I say. She just wants to hurt me with words now, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Update 3. Today was my 30th birthday, yay, I suppose, but the day felt completely ordinary, just a standard work day. When I finally got home, I found my sister, Carlene, waiting for me. My fiancé wasn't home yet. Carlene congratulated me, seeming almost ordinary at first. But it didn't take long for things to sour. I couldn't act how I usually would around her, attentive, always asking what I could do to help, and she started to show her irritation. Suddenly, Carlene launched into an accusation. She told me she knew I never loved the boys, that I was just jealous because I didn't have kids of my own. She claimed I tried to make them love me more, so that I'd have grounds to falsify reports to CPS and get custody of her children. The whole thing was so far-fetched and absurd, I actually let out a nervous laugh. I told her, probably with more honesty and exhaustion than kindness, that I didn't even want kids, certainly not hers. Even if someone handed them to me, I wouldn't take them. In hindsight, maybe that was cruel, but I was just so tired. My words only made her angrier. She started accusing me again, ranting about how horrible it would be for her boys to know I had abandoned them, that I'd proved I never loved them. I could feel it escalating, so I just asked her straight out, why was she here? Where were the kids? Her eyes flashed. She said their whereabouts were none of my business, fair enough, I suppose, but that she'd come to tell me I'd never see them again. The reality was, I'd already accepted I might never see those boys again, maybe it was even probable. I didn't react, but that only seemed to make her angrier. Suddenly, she lunged, trying to grab me, but I'd been careful to stand about 6 feet away. She couldn't reach me, and I just ran back into my building, slamming the door behind me. Thankfully, it locks automatically. Still, she followed and started kicking the door, so I shouted through it that I'd call the police if she didn't leave. After one last kick, she finally walked off without another word. I slipped upstairs to my apartment and sat right down on the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even write, so I made a voice recording on my phone, just in case I need to call the police or a lawyer. For maybe 20 minutes, I just sat there on the floor, breathing and listening to my pulse. Then the door lock rattled, panic shot through me until I realized it was just my fiancé getting home from work. He found me still sitting on the floor and, unsurprisingly, he freaked out. I told him everything, every word, every threat. He insisted we call the police and tell CPS about Carlene's behavior. I felt uneasy about it, reporting my own sister after everything we lived through as kids, knowing nobody ever reported our parents, even when they should have. He asked me a question that stopped my thoughts. Wouldn't I report this if it was another family at work? I told him that was unfair, that I don't even work with kids because of my past, but the truth is, yes, I probably would. It's late now and I can't sleep. I'm just lying here, worrying about how I'll make the police report tomorrow, what I'll say to CPS. I suppose I'll have to just tell them exactly what happened and let them figure out what's relevant. At least some of this is already in motion. CPS let us know earlier this week, Monday, I think, that Carlene is under investigation, and they gave me her caseworker's contact info. That part, at least, should be simple to follow up on. But nothing about any of this feels simple at all. Update 4. Sorry it's taken me so long to share an update. These days, I'm throwing myself into extra shifts at work just to keep occupied. Anything to fend off how much I miss the boys. Ever since my sister stormed out and kicked at our door, I haven't heard a single word from them. Total silence. I've kept in touch with CPS a handful of times, but we made it clear, taking the boys in, whether even for a short-term foster placement, is just not possible for us unless absolutely necessary. As a result, they're sharing less and less about what's going on. It's such a strange feeling, this disconnect. It's like I've become an outsider to their lives overnight, no longer privy to the updates I used to get, but I get it, I'm on the outer edge now. I've learned that the family court date is on the calendar for next month. My fiancé and I have debated if we should even ask to attend, but the truth is, our role in whatever solution they're working toward is gone. Honestly, I'm not sure if we'd even be allowed to go. Family court here is notoriously private, maybe that door was never open to us in the first place. I've started to accept that I may never see those boys again. I keep hoping that maybe, a decade from now when they're older and have phones of their own, I'll be able to quietly check in on them, maybe reintroduce myself. That's a long time from now, but even the distant hope gives me something to look forward to. The last I heard, CPS was still actively investigating. Before they stopped telling me things, it even sounded likely that the boys would need at least a short-term foster home. My sister, though, she kept making things worse for herself. She skipped mandatory meetings, ignored attempts to reach her, and one day she arrived at her house without the boys right as CPS turned up. It quickly came out that she'd left the kids home alone the whole time she was gone. CPS actually called me, trying to see if I knew where she was or how long she'd been away, but by that point I'd stopped communicating with her. She claimed she'd just started down the street to drop something off and was gone less than 3 minutes. I'm not sure if I believe that story, and neither did CPS. Let me explain why we can't take the boys ourselves. My health isn't great, I struggle with a chronic illness, and my fiancé uses a wheelchair. We live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, and just the thought of trying to squeeze the boys' beds and their stuff in here would make it impossible for him to get around. That's simply not okay. And, more than that, neither of us wants kids, not now, not ever. I don't think I'd be a very good parent, and my fiancé shouldn't be expected to take on that responsibility either. It's not something he signed up for. At the end of the day, I just hope the boys are young enough that a new placement, even if temporary, won't be too hard on them. I hope, wherever they end up, it's a safe place they can land, even if it's not with me. Update 5. I wasn't planning to post again, but something happened yesterday that I can't shake. I'm still processing it all, honestly. My fiancé and I were grocery shopping when I spotted a familiar figure in the produce section. It was Jake, Carlene's ex-boyfriend from about 2 years ago, the one she always claimed was the love of her life before things imploded between them. I'd always liked Jake, he was good with the boys, and honestly, he seemed to bring out a calmer side in my sister. When they broke up, she told me he'd cheated on her with some woman from his work. Jake saw me first and came over. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't been sleeping. After some awkward small talk, he asked if we could talk privately. My fiancé took the card and gave us some space. That's when Jake dropped a bomb I wasn't expecting. He told me that Carlene had been reaching out to him constantly since everything went down, his words. Apparently, she'd been telling him that CPS took the boys because I made up lies about her, and that she needed his help to get them back. She'd been begging him to testify that she was a good mother when they were together. But here's the thing that made my stomach drop. Jake told me he never cheated on Carlene. He said the woman from work was just a friend, and when Carlene found some innocent texts between them, she flew into a rage and accused him of having an affair. He tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She kicked him out that same night and refused to let him see the boys again, even though he'd grown attached to them. Jake said he'd been trying to move on, but then Carlene started calling him 3 weeks ago, crying and desperate. She told him she realized she'd made a mistake about the cheating, that she'd been going through stuff and overreacted. She begged him to come back, saying the boys missed him and that they could be a family again. The part that really got to me was when Jake said Carlene had offered to let him move back in immediately, no discussion, no working through their issues, just straight back to how things were. But when he said he needed time to think about it, she completely switched tactics. She started sending him photos of the boys looking sad, telling him it was his fault they were crying because he abandoned them too. Jake looked directly at me when he said, "She's doing the same thing to me that she did to you, isn't she?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated, like finally, someone else could see the pattern I'd been trapped in for so long. But another part of me felt sick, realizing how deep this manipulation goes with Carlene. Jake asked me point blank if the CPS report was really about made-up lies. I told him the truth, that I'd reported genuine concerns about the boys being left alone and Carlene's escalating behavior. He nodded slowly and said that explained a lot, because some of the stories Carlene had been telling him didn't add up. Then Jake told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that in their last phone call, Carlene had mentioned she was working on a plan to get the boys back and make everyone who hurt her pay for what they did. When he pressed her on what that meant, she got evasive and hung up. I immediately thought about calling the CPS caseworker, but Jake stopped me. He said he wanted to do it himself, that he felt partially responsible for not speaking up sooner about Carlene's behavior patterns when they were together. He'd apparently witnessed several incidents where she'd manipulated situations or used the boys to get what she wanted, but he'd convinced himself it was just stress from being a single mom. After we parted ways, my fiancé and I barely spoke during the rest of our shopping trip. I could see the worry in his face. When we got home, he finally said what we were both thinking. What if she tries something with us? What if her plan involves more than just getting the kids back? I've been checking the locks on our doors obsessively since yesterday. Every time I hear footsteps in the hallway, my heart races. I keep thinking about how angry she was when she showed up on my birthday, how she tried to grab me. The fact that she's now manipulating Jake the same way she manipulated me makes me realize this isn't just about the stress of losing her kids, this is who she is. I called in sick to work today because I couldn't concentrate. I keep replaying Jake's words about Carlene's plan and wondering what that could possibly mean. My fiancé suggested we might want to stay at his sister's place for a few days, just until we know more about what's happening with the CPS case. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own sister, but here we are. The worst part is, I still miss those boys every single day. I still hope they're okay. But I'm starting to accept that the sister I thought I knew, the one I kept making excuses for, might not have ever really existed. Update 6. I'm writing this from my fiancé's sister's house, where we've been staying for the past 4 days. What happened Tuesday night has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my sister, and honestly, about my own judgment. Tuesday evening, around 9 p.m., our downstairs neighbor called me. She said a woman had been sitting in a car outside our building for hours, and she was getting concerned because the woman kept getting out to walk around the property, looking up at different windows. The description she gave me made my stomach drop. It was definitely Carlene. My fiancé immediately wanted to call the police, but I hesitated. What if our neighbor was wrong? What if Carlene was just, I don't know, working up the courage to apologize? Even after everything, some part of me still wanted to believe she was capable of that. Around 11 p.m., my phone started buzzing with texts from an unknown number. The messages were rambling and desperate. I know you're not home. Where are you hiding? The boys keep asking for their aunt and I don't know what to tell them anymore. You've destroyed our family. Then, Jake told me what you said about me. I thought he was on my side but you poisoned him too. That's when I realized Jake had followed through on contacting CPS. The messages kept coming, getting more erratic. I saw your lights are off but your car is here. Are you ignoring me? I just want to talk. Then, I'm not leaving until you face me. My fiancé called the police while I called the CPS caseworker. The officer who responded was actually familiar with our case. Apparently, there had been a previous report about Carlene showing up at Jake's workplace last week, demanding to speak with him and causing enough of a scene that security had to escort her out. What the officer told us next made my blood run cold. When they approached Carlene's car, she wasn't alone. The boys were in the back seat, asleep in their car seats. It was nearly midnight, and they'd apparently been there for hours. She claimed she'd brought them to see me, that they were missing their aunt and crying all the time. But when the officer asked why she hadn't just knocked on our door or called, she got defensive and started rambling about how I'd been avoiding her unfairly. The officer said Carlene seemed genuinely confused when they pointed out that stalking someone and keeping children out past midnight wasn't appropriate behavior. She kept insisting she was just being a good mother by bringing the boys to see family. CPS took emergency custody that night. I watched from the window as they gently transferred the boys to a caseworker's car. Even from 3 floors up, I could see how sleepy and confused they looked. It broke my heart, but I also felt relief knowing they'd be somewhere safe. The next morning, Jake called me. He'd been contacted by CPS as part of their investigation, and they'd asked him about his relationship history with Carlene. That's when he told me something that made everything click into place in the most disturbing way. Jake said that when he and Carlene first started dating, she'd told him I was obsessed with her boys and would show up unannounced, trying to take over their care. She'd painted me as someone who was desperate for children but couldn't have them, so I was living vicariously through her sons. She'd even claimed I'd offered to pay for things just so I could feel like their real parent. Hearing this felt like a punch to the gut. I realized that while I thought I was helping my sister, she'd been systematically isolating me by making me seem like the unstable one to anyone who might have offered her support. Jake said he'd always found it odd that he never saw this obsessive behavior she described, but she'd convinced him I was just good at hiding it around him. The CPS caseworker called yesterday to let me know that the boys have been placed with an emergency foster family. She said Carlene is now required to undergo a psychological evaluation before any visitation can be considered. They're also looking into her housing situation more closely. Apparently, when they did a home check after Tuesday night, they found the apartment in complete disarray, with no food in the refrigerator and unpaid utility notices stacked on the counter. I keep thinking about those boys sleeping in that car for hours while Carlene sat outside our building, plotting whatever she thought would happen when she saw me. I keep wondering how long this pattern of manipulation has been going on, and how many people she's convinced that I'm the unstable one. My fiancé's sister has been incredibly understanding about us staying here, but I can see the strain it's putting on their household. We're looking into getting a security system installed at our apartment before we go back. I never thought I'd need to protect myself from my own family, but I'm starting to understand that the person I called my sister might have been performing a role all along. Jake texted me this morning. He said Carlene had somehow gotten his new phone number and left him a voicemail claiming that I'd seduced him at the grocery store and was trying to steal him away from her. The delusion is so complete that I don't think she even knows what's real anymore. I miss those boys more than I can put into words, but for the first time since this all started, I'm beginning to hope that they might actually have a chance at stability, even if it's not with any of us. Update 7. I've been putting off writing this update because honestly, I wasn't sure anyone would believe what's happened over the past 2 weeks. Hell, I'm still not sure I believe it myself. Last Thursday, I got a call from Jake around 11 p.m. He was whispering and sounded terrified. He told me Carlene had somehow gotten into his apartment building and was banging on his door, screaming that she knew I was inside with him. The thing is, I was at home with my fiancée, nowhere near Jake's place, but Carlene was completely convinced I was there, yelling things like I saw her car. And stop hiding from me, Jake said he'd called building security, but before they arrived, Carlene had started sobbing in the hallway, telling his neighbors that her sister had stolen her boyfriend and was trying to destroy her family. She was apparently so convincing that one elderly neighbor actually came out to comfort her. When security finally showed up, Carlene was sitting on the floor outside Jake's door, crying and claiming she just wanted to talk to both of them. The security footage later showed that Carlene had been there for over 3 hours, just sitting and waiting. Jake said the most disturbing part was that she seemed genuinely shocked when he opened the door and I wasn't there. She kept insisting his apartment had a back exit I must have snuck out of. But here's where things get really twisted. 2 days later, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from again, Marcus, Carlene's ex from about 4 years ago, the boy's father. He'd been completely out of the picture since before the younger one was even born. Carlene had always told me he was a deadbeat who wanted nothing to do with his kids. Marcus told me a very different story. He said he'd been trying to maintain some kind of relationship with the boys, but Carlene had made it impossible. Every time he'd arranged to see them, she'd create some emergency or crisis that required him to cancel. When he'd offer child support, she'd refuse it, then later use his lack of financial contribution as proof he didn't care about his sons. The reason Marcus called me was because CPS had contacted him about possibly taking custody of the boys. During their interviews, they'd asked about his relationship with Carlene and why he'd been absent. That's when he learned about everything that had been happening with me, the stalking, the manipulation, all of it. Marcus told me something that made my skin crawl. He said that 3 months before they broke up, Carlene had started accusing him of having an affair with me. She'd become obsessed with the idea that I was trying to steal him away, despite the fact that I was engaged and had barely spoken to him beyond polite greetings at family gatherings. She'd go through his phone, follow him to work, and create elaborate scenarios in her head about secret meetings between us. He said the final straw was when Carlene called my fiancé, crying, to warn him that I was cheating. My fiancé had been so confused by the call that he'd never even mentioned it to me. Marcus realized then that Carlene wasn't just suspicious, she was completely detached from reality. The most heartbreaking part was when Marcus told me that both boys had been asking about him lately. The foster family had mentioned that the 3-year-old keeps asking where Daddy Marcus is and why he stopped coming to see them. Carlene had apparently been telling them that Marcus didn't love them anymore because they weren't good boys. Yesterday, I got a call from the CPS caseworker with an update that left me speechless. Carlene had been arrested. She'd shown up at the foster family's house somehow, I still don't know how she found their address, and tried to take the boys from their backyard while they were playing. The foster mom heard the commotion and came outside to find Carlene lifting the youngest over the fence while telling him they were going on a special adventure. When the police arrived, Carlene was incoherent, claiming that the foster family were kidnapping her children and that I had orchestrated the whole thing. She kept repeating that she needed to save them from my lies and that everyone was working against her. The caseworker told me they found notebooks in Carlene's car filled with detailed plans about how to expose me. Pages and pages of my supposed crimes, elaborate theories about how I'd manipulated Jake, Marcus, and even the CPS workers. She'd been tracking my work schedule, my fiancé's routine, even what time we usually went grocery shopping. But the most disturbing discovery was a letter she'd written but never sent. It was addressed to the boys, explaining why she had to protect them from Aunt Sarah and describing a plan to take them somewhere I'd never find them. The letter talked about starting fresh in another state, changing their names, and making sure I could never poison their minds against her again. Marcus has been granted emergency custody pending a full evaluation. He came by yesterday to update me, and I have to admit, seeing him again was strange. He's changed a lot, more mature, more stable. He told me he's been in therapy for the past 2 years, working through his own issues with boundaries and relationships. He asked me something I wasn't prepared for, whether I'd be willing to maintain a relationship with the boys if he gets permanent custody. He said he remembers how good I was with them when they were babies, and he thinks they need as much stability and love as possible right now. I told him I'd need to think about it. The truth is, I'm terrified of getting pulled back into any kind of family drama, even with the best intentions. But I also can't stop thinking about those little boys and everything they've been through. My fiancé and I finally moved back to our apartment, but we installed security cameras and changed the locks. Every time my phone rings, my heart races, wondering if it's going to be more news about Carlene or if she's somehow gotten out and is planning something else. The strangest part of all this is that I keep grieving for a sister I'm not sure ever really existed. I keep remembering moments we shared, times I thought we were close, and wondering how much of it was real and how much was just her practicing manipulation techniques on me. Marcus told me the boys are doing well with him so far, all things considered. He's gotten them into play therapy and is working with child psychologists to help them process everything that's happened. Part of me wants to see them desperately, but another part of me worries that my presence might just confuse them more right now. I don't know what happens next. Carlene is still in custody, and her lawyer is apparently pushing for a psychiatric hold. Marcus said the DA is considering stalking and attempted kidnapping charges, which could mean she won't be getting out anytime soon. I keep thinking about what Jake said about patterns, and I'm starting to wonder how long Carlene has been living in this alternate reality where everyone is conspiring against her. Looking back, I can see signs I missed, the way she'd get paranoid about friends, how she'd isolate herself and then blame others for abandoning her. For now, I'm just trying to focus on my own healing and figuring out how to move forward. Some days I feel angry, some days I feel sad, and some days I just feel empty. But for the first time in months, I'm not looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes, and that's something, I guess.